we're good to go. I will introduce myself. I'm Lori Callanan. I'm with the Finland Food Chain. And today we have Cindy Hale from Clover Valley Farms, who's going to be talking about IPM. And tell me what IPM is, Cindy.
Integrated Pest Management. And Integrated Pest Management isn't always organic, but I'm taking an organic edge, an organic angle to Integrated Pest Management. Yeah.
Good.
So we've got three people. If folks, so I'm going to be doing the presentation. So once it goes to the slides, I can't see the chat box. That's what Lori and her beautiful English flower garden are for. So folks, as you're listening, definitely say hi in the chat box, pop up any questions that you have in the chat box, and then Lori's going to be moderating and saying, hey, Cindy, there's a couple questions here and there. And just so everybody knows, I'm going to be going really fast, and there are some slides that have a lot of information on them, but that's okay because we're recording this and you're going to be able to download the recording as well as a PDF of all the slides. So you're going to have all that, so don't worry about writing everything down. So getting your questions in is probably the priority over writing things down. Should we just dive right in here, Lori?
Let's go for it.
All right.
We're up live on Facebook. We're live here on the live stream for the panelists.
I'm going to share my screen. I'm clicking on the share screen. And okay, there we go. Share screen. And can everybody see the lovely picture of me on the first slide?
Yes, you are up and running.
All right, Organic Integrated Pest Management for apple orchards. So I'm going to try to go fast through the slides so that I can address as many questions as possible. And you don't have to wait till the end. You can ask questions as we're going. And also just remember that this is going to be recorded and posted on the Finland Food Chain website. So you don't have to feverishly write notes. So why organic IPM? And the simple answer is because we want to get pesticides out of the food and our food and the environment. This is a source. If you haven't been familiar with this, it's the Ecological Working Group. They have for decades now gotten annual data from the USDA program on levels of pesticides in their monitoring efforts on various crops. And look at the top 6. If you eat any of those plants well, there's no animals. If you eat any of those plants, it's recommended that you only eat them organically because they are just full of pesticides. Apples used to be #1. Now they've been supplanted by strawberry, spinach, kale, collard, mustard green, nectarines. But they used to be #1 for many, many years. And on that website, if you join their little organization, donate $10, you can dive in and really get all the details of what that data shows. So for apples, over 42 pesticides are detected. Most of them have very negative effects on human health. Known carcinogens, hormone disruptors, neurotoxins, reproductive toxins, and a large number of them have very negative impacts on beneficial insects and honeybees. So if that ain't enough of a reason, then I don't know what there is. So what is the organic IPM? So IPM is just an acronym for Integrated Pest Management because it takes too long to say that. IPM. And then the basic concept of integrated pest management is that you understand something or enough of the life cycle of the pest or disease that you're trying to manage, and you target it at its weakest link so that you can use maybe no sprays. You might be able to just control it using cultural practices. You might be able to control it using physical controls. Biological controls, and then the last option is chemical controls, but then focusing on low toxin spot applications. So that's what I'm going to kind of whip through. I'm going to give a couple of slides here of some really good sources that if you want to dive more into all of this, and again, this will all be on the slide, so you don't have to write it all down. Midwest Organic Sustainable Education Service, Moses, if you're not already plugged in with what they do all kinds of wonderful things. One of many is their organic apple orchard resources. So that's a place to go to check out some more information and go to their conference. They always have some really good workshops on organic apple production. The Organic Fruit Growers Association is an excellent place if you're starting out or you're growing an orchard or you want to start. It's chock full of really, really great organic growers. And it's fruits in general, not just apples, but a lot of apple growers there. And one great benefit of being a member is that you can get on their listserv. And if you are on their listserv, you can say you got a question. Hey, what's this picture? What's this disease? Anybody got suggestions on how to manage this, that, or the other thing? And other people will respond. So it's a really nice network of people to get information. They also do workshops and field days. So really good place to check out. Okay, come on, little computer. Trying to forward it and it's not wanting to. Great. Huh. Okay. See the spinning wheel of death on my screen? Can you see the spinning wheel of death, Lori?
No, we're not seeing that.
I have a spinning wheel of death on my screen. So, escape. Oh, geez. Okay, there's another one. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so I guess it gave me permission to work again. So another source. This is it's a little bit dated. It's from 2007. Integrated Pest Manual for Apple Orchards, and we're going to post this a digital copy of this 69-page book on the Finland Food Chain website, where you can find these slides. It has in the past, and that link below is another source that you can get it online. It is free. It's in the public realm. It used to be posted on the Minnesota Department of Ag website, but they reorganized their website a year or so ago, and now you can't find it. But I have a copy, and I know it's in the public domain, so we're going to put that up for you as well. So it is caveats. It's not organic. It talks a lot about more toxic uses. Just you can tear those pages out or just ignore them. But what I really, really, really like about this manual is that it has really good phenological data on Minnesota orchards. That will become really important as we get farther in. These are some books, and then so the field guide for identification of pest, insects, disease, and beneficial organisms in Minnesota apple orchards. Again, that's supposed to be available on the Minnesota Department of Ag website. I wasn't able to find the link. The second one, I have both the beige colored book and the this blue one, the tree fruit guide, which you can find on Amazon. You can get used copies for like $7, and they're both really, really, really good in that they give good identification pictures and information about the various pests, also beneficials, and different diseases. And then this Michigan State University online fruit and nut site is very good. They have, again, lots of information on the pests, and you can download all that stuff. So those are some good resources. Can I make that go away? Let's go down here. Okay, so what are the components of an integrated pest management program for your farm? It doesn't have to be big. It can be really simple, but it'll include these four things in general. You're going to do some kind of monitoring so that you know what's out there. So if you don't ever walk through your orchard all summer, IPM won't work for you. You got to spend some time with your trees, walking through your orchard, noticing things. Hopefully, most of you, that's something something you want to do. And so then that's not a problem. Determining thresholds, when to do something. And everybody has different thresholds. There are economic thresholds. So if you're a commercial orchardist, you know, how much damage am I seeing in my fruit? And what does that translate to dollars? If you're selling fresh fruit for table-ready consumption to a co-op, your threshold is going to be a lot higher. You know, you're going to want to start doing something at a lower level of impact than, for example, my orchards, which I use all of my apples for cider, and that get turned into vinegar. And so because they're going through a double fermentation process, I don't really care if there's a little bit of apple maggot in there and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then if you're doing it for your backyard, maybe you just want to go completely no spray. So everybody is going to have a different kind of threshold depending on the goals of their orchard. And then we use these IPM strategies to plan that management. So what's the least toxic to humans and biology and the environment? What's most likely to be permanent? And that's where you get real powers. If you can find a semi or permanent solution, that's the best way to go. Obviously, you want it to be safe and effective, and it has to be cost effective. And then it has to be site appropriate. So you're going to evaluate your successes and failures. You're never going to have the same conditions year after year in your orchard. Some years it's going to be a really good year for apple scab. Other years it's going to be really good for fire blight. Other years it's going to be good for oblique banded leaf rollers. Oh, it's locking me out again. Okay, cool. This is so fun. I love technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. So there's some terms that I'm going to throw out, and I just want to let you know what they are so you don't get too confused. So phenology basically refers to the developmental stage of an organism. If you're talking about the plant, an apple tree, has it bud burst? Is it at tight cluster? Is it at pink? Is it at full bloom? Is it at fruit set? Those are phenological stages. Degree days, you're going to hear me use the word degree day a lot. It's basically a cumulative heat unit, and it's related to the biological heat that is needed for plants and animals to go through their life cycle. And most plants and animals, especially in our region, use degree days to move through their life cycle. So if it's a long, cool spring, they're going to move through their life cycle more slowly. If it's a hot, wet, they might move through their life cycle more quickly. And so monitoring degree days in some way is something that's involved in integrated pest management. And then you'll hear terms, and when you start reading, you're going to see and hear terms like benign, beneficial, pest. Shorthand, rule of thumb, pests do damage. Benign have no harmful or beneficial impacts, and the beneficials are predators or parasites that will help you control the pests in your orchard. And then resistance. So one of the best ways to manage, if you haven't planted trees yet and you're thinking about doing an orchard, is learning about what diseases and pests are the biggest problem in your area, and then selecting cultivars that have resistance or even immunity to them, particularly apple scab and fire blight. Different varieties will have very different levels of susceptibility or resistance. And if you're in an apple scab and fire blight area, which basically everybody is, then if you're planting, you want something that's going to be resistant. Or if you're planting something that is intermediate or even susceptible, know that you're going to have to do more management on that particular variety. So the phenology, Lori, you're going to have to give me a time count because I forgot to set my timer. So, okay.
We're
So
at 20 after.
cool. All right. So phenology refers to the developmental stage of an organism. I kind of said that, and you're going to see more of that. You're going to see that again. Degree days is the cumulative heat units. When we're calculating degree days, so the first day the sun comes out in the spring in February, we're not really accumulating degree days. Degree days in this northern temperate climate, the temperature has to get to a certain degree before those heat units start to accumulate. And for most insects in our region, that base is 50. So when the temperature reaches 50 degrees, that's enough to like wake them up out of their winter dormancy and say, oh, I might need to start moving through my life cycle. And so it might be, you get 150-degree day in February, no big deal. You get 350-degree days in March. Oh, things are moving out of their dormancy maybe a little earlier than they would have. Traditionally in Minnesota, people started in apple orchards, they started recording degree days on April 1st. If you waited that long this year, you missed a lot of degree days because it was a warm March. Similarly, for funguses, and in particular apple scab, they become biologically active at a little lower base temperature, usually about 30 degrees. Once the snow is gone and it hits 30 degrees, apple scab can start producing spores. So when we're talking about degree day, that base temperature is something to kind of understand. So if you wanted to calculate it, if you have a high-low thermometer at your farm, you can calculate the degree days just on a super easy, non-technical way. You take the highest and the lowest temperature recorded that day, add them together, divide by 2, subtract the base, and that's how many degree days you accumulated that day. And if you do that every day, add them together, you're going to get an increasing number. So to give you an example, and I put a little red box around the top there. So it's April 1, 14, 29. So the bottom, it says April, and below the month, it says 7, 14, 21, 28. That's the date. Above it is the degree date. So on April 7th, in this example, on April 7th, there was 1 degree day. On May 7th, there was 156 degree days. And these little bars, the little green bars, are the phenological stages of apple buds as they break dormancy and go to fruit set. So you can see they start breaking dormancy when you don't need a whole lot of degree days for them to start breaking dormancy. Green tip is when you start to get that the buds start to swell. They also sometimes call it silver tip because they get kind of furry and silver looking. Tight cluster is when the buds, you can actually see the little green noogies that I call flower buds. Pink is when you can see the actual, oh, there we go. That's even better. So now you can see here some visuals of what those different phenological stages look like. So this table with the pictures comes out of that IPM book. And you'll also notice that it says green tip, April 7th to 24th. Ignore the dates. Those dates have no relevancy in northern Minnesota. What you really care about is the degree days. So you get green tip at about 25 degree days. Does that make sense? And then this table is nice because it also tells you about what kind of pests that you might see emerging at those same degree days. So it's a really nice, handy one-page thing that'll get you started on kind of knowing what to look for. So again, these tables are in that IPM book that we're going to put up so you don't have to try to remember them all. But here, this is the phenological stages of different pests that you might have in your region. Phenological stages of different diseases, apple scab, powdery mildew, fire blight, sooty blotch, fly speck. Again, this is all going to be in this Apple Orchards book that we're going to put up on the website. So you'll have lots of great nighttime reading. All right, we're going to move right on to meeting the culprits. So the earliest pests that you generally will see are the green caterpillars that are external feeders. So they're the red banded or the oblique banded leaf rollers. They lay their eggs in the very tip cluster of new leaves. So and then when the when the caterpillars, the eggs hatch and there's little bitty caterpillars, they start to feed on those tips of leaves. And they're really easy to spot. So this is one thing, you know, walk through your orchards, look at the tips of your leaves. And if you see a leaf that's partially chewed and rolled up, look inside of it and you might find one of those little green caterpillars with a black head, and then you can squish it. If you have a large, like really large outbreak of them, and this goes for armyworms, any kind of caterpillar, the product to use is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a soil bacteria that functions as a stomach toxin to all lepidopteran caterpillars. That includes monarchs. So you're not going to spray this anywhere near your pollinator habitat. You're just going to spot spray it on the tips of leaves of your branches where you're seeing big infestations. If you have a lot of these, and the reason you monitor the adult is because then using this degree day model, you can see that if I see a bunch of moths, we know that's at 220 to 250 degree days, that we know in another 200 degree days, those eggs are going to hatch. And that's when you treat. Or you wait until you actually see the little teeny caterpillars and you can treat at that point. So you don't have to be spraying constantly. You just can, with a little bit of information, you can know when you need to treat. Codling moth, I'm not going to talk a lot about because it's not in northeastern Minnesota yet. It's in Duluth. We don't know how fast it will be moving, but again, that's why monitoring is a really good thing. Internal feeders like the codling moth are much harder to deal with because you can't just put out a really non-toxic thing like BT that kills their caterpillars, because their caterpillars are protected inside the fruit. So for organic operations, there's been a lot of research over the last 10, 15 years developing hormone disruption. The other thing is just good orchard hygiene. Don't leave apples on the ground. Apple maggot, I'm pretty sure we have it all over Minnesota. It's a little fly. It comes in the summer, and it's got these black striped wings. This one, the apple maggot, looks superficially similar to other maggot flies, but it's got that little white triangular dot between the thorax and the abdomen, if you can see that. And then you can see the wing patterns there. I put the apple maggot has what I call this sideways F. Ooh, we so cool. We had apple maggot. There's like a sideways F on the wing, and that and the white dot are distinctive for that species. So when you start to see apple maggots is when you treat them, when you see the adults, because what the adults are doing is they're looking for your apples, and where you see those little circles, those are what we call little sting holes. They're laying their eggs just under the apple of the skin of the apple. And these are the ones that cause those little brown channels that you can see in your apple. You know, and frankly, unless it's really bad, they're not that, I mean, I still use them for pies and sauce and stuff like that, you know, but if they're really bad, like the one on the bottom there, they can be so deformed and bitter that they become inedible. So the best way to treat organically for apple maggot is using a product called Surround. It's a kaolin clay. You spray it you just spray it on the tree, the whole tree, and it's it does both a combination of mechanical protection of the apple, so it makes it harder for the apple maggot to lay its egg. But the primary thing is that it removes, apparently, these apple maggots are responding to the visual shape of a tree and red. So they're in there in the summer when your apples have started to blush. And if you spray your tree and your apples with kaolin clay, it takes away that visual cue. So they might still be flying around somewhere, but they're not finding your fruit. It's highly effective, and it's completely non-toxic. If you're going to use it, you're going to, if and you don't, that tree that's really sprayed, that gray ghostly looking tree, you wouldn't want to eat fresh apples off that without washing them, obviously, but the kaolin clay can easily be washed off. It'll get washed off in a rain, and so you may have to reapply occasionally. But monitoring when the apple maggot flies, the adults are in your orchard, spraying at that time, you can do a lot to limit the amount of impact of apple maggot. Plum curculio is another one that's not yet in Minnesota, but these are some pictures of what they look like. If you want to see them, you can always go to Bayfield because they got terrible plum curculio. And then there's also a whole host of benign and holistic insects that I would call benign if you have a well-managed orchard. So spotted leaf tentiform miner and mites, they can get way out of control if you're spraying lots of chemicals on your orchards. It's taking away the beneficial and parasitoid and predatory native insects. I've never had a problem with spotted leaf tentiform miners or mites. They're in my orchards, but they never reach points where they are anything that I'm concerned about. Similarly with aphids and scale, if you have good pollinator and native predator habitat, you probably won't have problems with this. Maybe you have an outbreak every once in a while, and insecticidal soap is definitely the way to go. All right, I'm going real fast here. How are we doing on time? Let me look. Okay. So this is one that you can, if you have it in your orchard, you want to do some cultural management to try to get rid of it. Apple scab, there are two stages of apple scab, what's called primary apple scab, which is the scab that colonizes the leaf. When it starts on the left, it kind of is yellowish, those yellowish spots, and they turn brown. And if you look at them with a microscope in the center of those, or a hand lens, the center of those brown things have little stalked doohickeys called conidia, which produce spores. So if you don't take care of your primary apple scab, then you get what's called secondary apple scab. Those pores that are coming out of the funguses that are on the leaf get out in the air and they settle on the apple. And if conditions are right, meaning it's warm and wet and shady, that's what fungus is like, warm, wet, and shady. If conditions are right, you can get a really scabby apple, and that can make it unmarketable, unusable. Apple scab itself is not toxic, unlike molds and other things, but it's bitter and it can really wreck the apple. And this is this is after reading the life cycle of apple scab. Apple scab and funguses in general require three things: warmth, wetness, and spores. So if you remove the spores by keep having good orchard hygiene, that means you're raking up or mowing all of the leaves that fall in the fall or throughout the season so that you're not getting more spores being generated. Use good cultivar selection, and if you still have outbreaks, I use a micronized sulfur spray. I say read the labels, because there are so many products out there that have sulfur, and then they'll be like, and neem, and pyganic, and these other things. I really encourage people to steer away from those multi-ingredient products, because neem and pyganic are much more broad spectrum toxins that you don't need to control apple scab. What you need to control apple scab is something like a sulfur spray, just sulfur. What it's doing is it's changing the pH on the surface of the leaf and the surface of the fruit so that it becomes an uninhabitable environment for the fungus. And it has a little bit of kickback. So once the apple scab starts, you can spray it, you can get things under control. Fire blight. This is a bacterial infection. If you have never seen it, you don't want to see it. The right picture, well, it's on my right, I hope it's on your right, is the one with the kind of little hook shape. That's what's called twig blight. And then the other picture on the left is what's called blossom blight. So it's a bacteria that gets introduced new growth. So you typically do not see fire blight on old leaves or more established twigs because they have a thick cuticle and the bacteria can't get inside. So where you see bacteria, fire blight bacteria getting in is on the rapidly growing fresh new tips where they haven't developed a thick cuticle, or the blossoms because blossoms don't have a thick cuticle. And then the bacteria gets in there and affects it, and it'll start marching its way down the tool or down the stem. And you must cut it out. You must cut it out. As soon as you see it, you should cut it out. There's really no, doesn't matter what time of year, you just cut it out. Get rubber gloves or something, because remember, this is a bacteria. So you're going to cut this out and you're going to be handling it in some way. So stick it in a garbage bag. You're using rubber gloves, and between each cut, if you're using a bypass pruner, between each cut, you're going to sanitize your tool with alcohol, because you don't want to be moving that bacteria from tree to tree or to a new location on a tree. It's often spread, especially on the blossoms, it's often spread via pollinators, which is unfortunate, but that's why you want to just do your best to try to keep it out of your orchard by cutting it out if you ever see it. There are more and more cultivars that are fire blight resistant, maybe even immune. So cultivar selection is important. Historically, antibiotics, because it's bacterial, if you have a bacterial infection and you go to the doctor, he or she gives you an antibiotic. But you don't take antibiotics every day because that's dumb and it creates antibiotic resistance. Same thing in orchards. Unfortunately, especially on the West Coast, antibiotics were used prophylactically, so there's lots of fire blight resistant cultivars coming out of the West Coast. And because of that and the abuse of antibiotics are no longer allowed in organic certification. There was a time when you could have an organic certified orchard and use antibiotics. But it appears that there are some copper sprays that are out there that are pretty effective if you have a bad outbreak of fire blight. Be aware that copper can have phototoxicity, so you don't spray copper on a bright sunny day or it's going to burn your leaves. So if your fire blight got away from you and it started working down that twig, you're going to want to cut that whole twig off. So you can see on that twig where the brown is and then it turns green, that brown part is that's split between the fire blight infected limb and the not infected limb. You want to go about 6 inches below that or to the next junction and take that limb off. And then all of that fire blight infested material needs to be removed immediately and burned or thrown away. You don't want it, you don't leave it anywhere because it'll just create more fire blight. All right. So monitoring degree days. So you can just use a high-low thermometer and do the little math that I had at the very beginning. But if you want to get a little more geeky and have access to some of these degree day models, Specware, if you just Google Specware, it's a really great company. They sell all kinds of really interesting weather and data collection units, and they're really good to work with. But like all companies, they tend to want you to buy something more than what you actually need. So it's hard to find this particular unit on their website because they're going to show you the big fancy race car orchard monitoring stations. But if all you want is temperature and leaf wetness, which is all you need to run the models, you need temperature for degree day and leaf wetness to run the apple scab models. Those are the only 2 data points you need. And so all you need is this temperature and leaf wetness data logger. that little thing that looks kind of gold thing that looks kind of like a solar panel, that's an artificial leaf. It's measuring moisture, and that'll tell you how long your leaves stay wet. That's really important when you're modeling for fungal infections. And then the white tower, that's those are just radio shields that protect this data logger. Super easy. They're super easy to use, super effective. I've had a station for 8 years in my orchard. I've never had a problem with it. When I bought my last set a few years ago for a friend, they were like $780. Maybe they're 1,000 now. Maybe they're less. Maybe they're more. I don't know. But they're, for somebody who's got enough trees that you really want to get into a little bit more of the minutia, that's the way to go. And if Lori, if there's enough interest, I'd be happy to do like a how to run models on your data logger stuff. If there's ever interest, just throw that out there.
All right.
For monitoring, so the first thing is you just go out and look in your orchard. But if you want to use, again, this degree day models, remember when we were talking about the green apple worm? We were monitoring when the adults show up. This is how we do that. You use what's called a delta trap, and then you get a pheromone lure, that little, what color is that? Maroon, rust-colored rubber nipple thingy. You put a push pin through it and hang it in the top center of that delta trap. There's a little sticky pad that you can remove. You put those out, and they attract via the hormones certain moths. And then once you get you can follow those models, you can get once you start seeing the adults, then you know, okay, now 200 degrees days from now, I'm going to see caterpillars, and I might want to start scouting more intensively and or spraying BT. Monitoring of apple maggots, we use these red balls with an apple lure. Did I have? Oh yeah, so Great Lakes IPM, www.greatlakesipm.com. They have, again, all the things you need and 18 million more. What you need is a delta trap with the pheromone lures for, in northern Minnesota, oblique banded or red banded. They're kind of attracted to each other's pheromones, so you can just pick one of those. The lesser or oriental appleworm, and maybe the codling moth. So for caterpillars, you're really only having to monitor 1 or 2 as opposed to 5 or 6 if you're in southern Minnesota. Apple maggots, you can monitor using these fancy red apple balls, but a red solo cup works just as well. Cover it in tanglefoot, which is a sticky substance. And you don't need many. You just need one in the middle of your orchard or middle of a block, and you monitor it. So when you see the adults, that's when you start spraying your surround. And when you stop seeing adults, you can stop spraying, right? You don't have to spray forever. Again, scouting early can be the most valuable thing so that you can know what's coming and have a plan ready for treatment. Cultural practices, the biggest thing is don't leave apples on the ground, don't leave apples on the ground, don't leave apples on the ground, don't leave apples on the trees, don't leave leaves on the ground. Mow them, have your chickens eat them, have your sheep eat them, have your pigs run through and eat them. You just don't leave them on the ground because they're the place that a lot of these bugs overwinter, and diseases as well. Support native pollinator habitat, both on your farm and also locally. You know, if you're living near somebody or there's a highway, you know, planting going in, maybe suggest that they put in some pollinator habitat. And another thing that you can do, just cultural practices, is good annual pruning. So if your canopy is well pruned, it's open, and there's air and sun that gets in, that means your leaves aren't going to stay wet as long, right? And that means you're going to have less fungus because they dry out quicker. And then the other piece is managing the fruit load. So on the right, you see that cluster of 7 little apples. You're going to want to take those down to 1, maybe 2. And it's really, really hard if you've never thinned your apples because you feel like you're going to lose apples. But data shows unequivocally that if you thin your apples to 1 or 2 per cluster, you'll get more pounds per tree, bigger apples, and healthier, more disease-free apples. So you just got to get through that because obviously where these apples are touching, it's going to be moist and stay wet, and that's where you're going to get infection.
Cindy, just letting you know we're at 10:46.
And that's my last slide.
And a reminder that
dog.
A reminder that if you're interested in pruning, we do on our website, finlandfoodchain.org. You can watch Cindy's pruning Zoominar that we've done. So that's another resource for you.
Yep, and the slides are there too. So you can listen to me yammer on, or you can look at the slides, or both. Questions?
I am not seeing any questions, so please type them into the chat.
Or you can unmute and just ask, because we've only got a couple people.
Yeah, and Facebook Live too. You can type in and I can see the questions if you're watching there.
Wow, I was that good? That's awesome. Lori, do you have any questions?
I'm wondering how applicable these would be to other types of fruit, high bush cranberries, pears. I know there are some varieties of pears.
Yeah, pears definitely very transferable to a limited degree. Plums and cherries, any of the tree fruits, you can pretty much use similar. Sometimes for cherry, you have a little bit different, but yeah, in general. I grow high bush cranberry, June berries, aronia. I have never had problems with any of this in any of those. I also raise currants, and I do get leaf rust sometimes. And a good treatment for that is, again, because leaf rust is a fungus, a sulfur spray. So again, the sulfur spray, all they're doing is they're changing the pH of the surface of the leaf long enough that it prevents the conidia or the little spores from germinating or taking hold on the leaves. So it's a really simple and very non-toxic way to control fungus.
One more question. Does the distance separating the trees impact how much pests you might be dealing with?
It can, if your trees are really close and the canopies are interacting, limbs of the trees are interacting, you can get some cross pest that way, definitely. And the closer and more closed the orchard is, again, think about whether it's an orchard or an individual tree, you want lots of light and air penetration in the canopy. So if your trees are really, really close and they're creating a dark and cool and wetter environment, you're going to have the potential for more problems. And then you might have to do a little bit more management. But again, pruning is a really good way to manage that, and then potentially prevent apple scab from ever even taking hold in your orchard.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions out there. Any final words or additional comments that you can think of?
Well, it's an early spring this year. If you haven't noticed, even up in Finland, right? I'm down in the banana belt in Duluth, and even here, it's like, what? My apples have not started. They've just started to break dormancy. They're not at green tip yet, so I'm happy about that. I was very nervous in March that we were going to have, an April bloom, and we're going to lose our whole crop. But that didn't happen, so I'm happy. And now with this warmth, I'm watching my leaf, I'm watching, we don't have leaves out yet. So you don't have to worry about apple scab until there's leaves out. So the apple scab is, because it's warm and it's above 30 degrees, the spores are being produced, but there's no leaves for them to land on. So if there's no leaves for them to land on, we might get a pass on apple scab this year, at least in northern Minnesota, just because of the nature of our spring. So, yeah. Well,
Wonderful.
thanks everybody for coming. I hope it was helpful and interesting. And we'll have this and the other resources up on the Finland Food Chain website within the week.
Yep. So thanks to all our attendees. Thank you, Cindy, for a great presentation.
Thanks.
Just a reminder that the slideshow and the reference material, the different links to access some of this information will all be also posted on our website, finlandfoodchain.org. You can sign up for future webinars via our newsletter, which you can also subscribe to at that same website. So have a wonderful day. Get out and enjoy the sun. So glad.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's where everybody is today, because I certainly would have been if I hadn't had this scheduled.
Yes, and that's where I'm going when we get off. So have a great day, and we will check in with you soon. Keep watching for future webinars from the Finland Food Chain. Thank you.
Thanks.